Welcome to Powered by People, the business podcast from Three Hills that explores how people's strategies transform organizations. In each episode, we meet an inspirational business leader, accountable for their business's readiness to win in tomorrow's world. I'm your host, Tim Pointer, a Chief People Officer and an operating partner at Three Hills, where we work to advance organizational performance across our portfolio of outstanding businesses. Joining me today is Tiger de Souza MBE, the Executive Director of People and Culture at the Samaritans, the charity that prevents suicide through the power of human connection. Tiger's commitment to volunteering has led him from sport onto the NSPCC, to the National Trust, and now the last 3 years at the Samaritans. He's worked in the commercial sector. The charity sector keeps calling him back to lead and deliver transformation, evolving services for our society's future. Awarded an MBE for his services to volunteering, Tiger is regularly voted one of the UK's most influential HR practitioners. Let's go hear from Tiger. Welcome to the podcast, Tiger.
Thanks, Tim. Good to be here.
I look at the mix of your background. You are someone who has worked across the commercial world and the charity world, NSPCC, National Trust, and now the Samaritans. And every time you're meeting organisations that need to adapt and change to the modern world, just for everyone joining the podcast today, just give us a little précis.
The key thing is I fell into working in the charity sector. I fell into being a people professional. I think quite a lot of people you speak to are in that same boat where we don't kind of like actively choose it. We just kind of like end up landing there.
It chooses you.
It does choose you. I always seem to be drawn to or get offered roles that are like the first time someone's done the role. So where it's like, we need some innovation, we need some fresh thinking, we've got a particular challenge we're trying to solve. Those ones are the ones that probably seem to appeal to me. And also I think I must do something at interview that tells people that I'm the guy for them. So yeah, from working in, starting in sport, working through a youth volunteering charity, ending up at NSPCC where I had a great 3 years. And at that point, I think became the point where I was like, actually, I'm going to go more than volunteering. I'm going to start to become a wider people professional. I was inspired by my time at NSPCC. And then I think going to RICS, having a very different, the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, very different environment, working in the global roles. The charity sector was almost my calling. So I came back, spent some time at National Trust, led on their inclusion agenda, had 5 very happy years there, and now at Samaritans with a whole new set of challenges and difficulties for us to face through.
Can you just set out what the opportunity was for you at the time that you joined the National Trust?
Yeah, so volunteering and participation, so engaging with communities has always been a really important part of what the National Trust did. It's got like 500 sites across the country, lots of communities they work with, people viewing and looking at their heritage in particular ways and engaging it in different ways. So they've had a volunteering and participation director there previously, but they realised and recognised not everyone in the nation was engaging with them, not everyone was participating in it, and they knew that their reason for being, and written into their charitable purpose, was being there for the benefit of the nation. So they kind of bolted on this inclusion element to this role. So it was volunteering, participation and inclusion director, really long mouthful. But it's the inclusion bit that really struck me. So it was that, okay, how do you work with an organisation that's 125 years old at that point? How do you support an organisation with that degree of history, with a multitude of different people having different perspectives around what it should and what it could do, with different communities engaging with it in different ways or choosing deliberately not to engage with it? How do you help them become inclusive? How do you help them to inspire a generation of people who maybe historically have never seen them as being for them?
There is no one right answer to this question.
And the brief was effectively about, how do we ensure that we are true to the history of our organisation, that we tell all of the different stories, and also that we engage people from across the entire population to want to meaningfully engage. And for some people, it might not be the houses. For some people, it might be the outdoors, and that's fine. But I think with an organisation like the National Trust, it's got such a breadth of offer that actually there is something there that appeals to everybody. And the work was started long before I joined, and the aspiration existed before I joined. And so my role wasn't to, write the story. It wasn't to, to direct the narrative. It was, how do I galvanize the latent desire, ambition and energy within the organisation? How do I help us come together to achieve and realise a final destination that we're all aligned with, which is that everyone, irrespective of who they are, what their background they may have, can find something they can cherish and value at the National Trust.
So credit to National Trust for identifying that was the shift that they wanted to make. Credit to them for finding you. Credit for you for being up for the gig. What did you do?
In terms of the credit, I'd also say credit to Hilary McGrady, who's the Director General. I mean, she came into office she started that role 2 months after I joined. She had a conversation with me early on saying the inclusion agenda is really important to me. I want it to be the legacy that I leave when I conclude my time here. And she gave me the support and the space and the resources to be able to deliver. Without that, it doesn't happen. And I think any organisation that's thinking about any kind of bold change, the leadership, particularly the person at the top of the ship, has to be 100% behind it. We agreed early on that we might not necessarily agree on how we get there, on the journey that we need to take, but we made sure early on that we were agreed about what does the final destination look like. And I think then as you try to navigate, there might be times when you hit tension, you hit difficulty. And my role was to help the organisation to hold its nerve when times got tough, to be really clear around what are the levers that we need to pull to get to the place that we need to get to not to be sidetracked, to actually do the difficult work that sometimes might mean difficult choices.
Can you just explain the National Trust governance structure? Like, who owns the National Trust? Because, so many people think of the National Trust in terms of stately homes and incredible locations, part of the nation's history. A number of people won't understand how that actually is knitted together.
This is a charity in its own right. So it was created by an Act of Parliament as a charity to preserve both the land and the buildings. But I think the important thing is that where it started from is not where it's ended up today. So it started effectively with a group of really dedicated philanthropists who wanted to change the world, but had a vision for the fact that there were loads of people in this country at that time that couldn't access outdoor space. Octavia Hill talked a lot about, breathing clean air, and, you've got to think back to Victorian times and what living standards were like in that moment and what access people had to amazing special places. So it began by buying up tracts of land, but holding them on behalf of the nation so anyone could visit them. That's where it started. And then the houses came later. Some of the challenges, I guess, around maintaining some of those properties, and a worry that history would be eradicated as it fell into disrepair. So they were then bestowed to the National Trust to look after, on behalf of the nation. There's a complexity in terms of that blend between outdoor space and preserving countryside and helping us in terms of some of the regeneration and some of the work we need to do to protect wildlife within this country, and then looking after the history, which in some cases is material in terms of the buildings and the collections that are bestowed within them. So there's that duality around that's the responsibility, but overall, the charity there to work in the public interest.
You've got that clarity of intent, you've got that alignment with leadership. What did you do?
Where do we want to get to? And then we built a theory of change. So work with the team I was blessed with, we worked backwards from that point of kind of like, if this is where we want to get to, what are the things that we need to do in order to achieve and realise that ambition? And I think one of the biggest challenges was helping the organisation to move away from almost a fixation on diversity as a focal point and saying diversity is important, but that will be a result of, that will be an outcome of doing inclusion work really well. And so rather than focusing on that, let's figure out how do we become a really inclusive organisation? What are the levers we need to pull so that people feel safe and feel able to be themselves and feel able to engage with us and feel that we are being honest and open about the histories that we look after? And then you can work back from that point and you can deliver all the other activities you do, and you can start to do stuff that will speak to particular demographics of people. Or, for example, we did a great piece of work around accessibility for disabled people to be able to enjoy our spaces and our places. We built a theory of change. We work backwards from that to figure out what are the key levers we need to pull to both make ourselves more inclusive and also to demonstrate to people who might have written us off in the past that we were for them and we wanted them to come.
That theory of change piece, help us to understand what that means and what it meant for the organisation.
For me, a theory of change is very simply a story about understanding where you want to get to, appreciating where you are today, and thinking through what are the things you need to do differently to move from where you are to where you want to be. And it is a theory because there is no clear roadmap. There is no way you will ever know exactly what are the things you need to do. And so there is a degree of fluidity that goes with it, and being agile and responsive enough to recognise if things aren't working, we'll do it differently, but patient enough to give things time to bed in and to deliver the impact you want.
And those are two very honest conversations that you need to have. We're going to be very honest about where we are, and there'll be different perspectives as to where we are, and there'll be no single truth as to where we are, because if you're on site X versus site Y, you have a different experience of what is true in that location. But then also you have to have a very honest conversation about why we're going to move to somewhere different. How did you align the leadership around those conversations? This isn't one and done. This, if only, right? This is a lived set of conversations that you have to show up again and again and again.
A lot goes back to Hillary. So she had her first leadership event. So this was 9 months after she started. It's a big thing for the Director General of National Trust. You're bringing together 500 odd people who are your leaders from across the organisation to a venue, and for 2 days. And she'd said initially, Tiger, I'd like you to have an hour to talk to people about inclusion. I think it's important that people hear directly from you about how you're going to try and lead us through this. And then she came back to me and said, I don't think an hour is going to be enough, Tiger. I think you need a bit more time. How does half a day sound? And I was like, so I'm nodding along. I'm going, yeah, that sounds good. No, I'm still in. I'm still a fish out of water. I'm still brand new in the organisation and shiny. And then she came back again and she said, actually, based on what you're sharing with us far, I think you need the whole of the first day. So she gave me the whole of the first day of her first leadership event, which is, monumental. And that enabled us to be very clear around where we were, about some of the challenges that we might face, about some difficult truths that we needed to face into and acknowledge and accept as an organisation, signalled that leadership were 100% on this journey with us, and gave us a platform to start a conversation. And you're right in terms of like that future binding element, and it enabled us to really capture the hearts and minds of the leaders in the organisation. And for those who weren't bought in, sent a very clear signal to them that there was a definite direction, an intentional direction we were moving in. So it was like kind of one of those get on the bus moments, because we know this is where we're going. That move by Hillary to create that space to truly and authentically step in behind the work we were looking to try to do, to be willing, to be open, to be vulnerable to the fact that we hadn't always got things right. And there were elements and aspects of her leadership, because she'd been promoted up from with our existing leadership team, where she felt that there was a degree of accountability she was taking. Those things, I think, created the space for an honest, reflective conversation about not only where we wanted to collectively get to, but what some of the challenges might be that we'll meet on the road.
What was one of those uncomfortable truths that had to be faced in that room on that day?
The question of, are we truly here for the nation? And, when you've got, over 5 million members, when you've got millions of people visiting your places on an annual basis, when you are as well known a brand as we are, generating, both income and revenue in, over $500 million per annum, it's really difficult in that moment to step back and go, yeah, there are some things we're not quite getting right, because there's a formula that we had baked, and that formula was working. It was working for a significant proportion of the population, and a risk that if you change that, you might damage your relationship with those people who already care about what you do. And I think an honest reflection on, yes, we are successful as an organisation. Yes, we are delivering incredible benefit, but we realise and we recognise that that is only to a proportion of the nation, and that's not through choice. So people aren't going, do you know what, I'm not quite sure I want to join that. There are some people out there who genuinely don't believe we are there for them, or that they would be welcome. And the banner and the framework for our inclusion ambition was titled Everyone Welcome. And it was about that people may still actively choose not to come. They may still choose not to engage with us, and that's okay. but we want that to be a conscious choice, not made because they feel like we are disregarding the history that they care about, we're not welcoming enough for them, or they would not feel safe to be able to be themselves in our places. And I think that was the biggest conversation we had on that day.
You know that you're going to get so many external voices saying, why are you doing this? Why am I seeing these changes? Why am I hearing about this shift? Because there's that sense of the National Trust curating history for the nation. Anytime you make a shift, some people will see that as a political decision. How do you ready the leadership team, the broader NT team?
You know that's going to happen. So as a collective and as a leadership and as your board, you know that that's going to come in your direction, so you're prepared in advance. But I think also it's about being really clear about where you're trying to get to, and you're trying to build authentic commitment to an agenda and an issue. There have been lots of organisations that have talked about, for example, EDI, they feel performative, they feel like a moment in time. There's been no real sustained commitment to it. So as an example for us, we were looking at what can we do in terms of Black History Month. We're responsible for history, and we came to a point where we had to make a decision organisationally as to whether or not we would do it when they were getting a lot of, challenge externally, and we opted in that moment that it would not be helpful for us to do it. But then a year later, we came back because we felt that we were able to progress. We did something really powerful. But the thing that will always stick with me was the year after that. I got invited to this event, and I'm in this cinema in West London, and it's all dark around me, and I'm watching this documentary that the team has produced, and there are literal tears rolling down my face because of, there are Black actors, there are Black artists that are sharing this narrative on this screen, and it's about us instigating a conversation, and I had nothing to do with it. So I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't know what they were preparing. It was all a complete surprise. And there's a great book called, you talked about books earlier, but there's a great book called New Power. And in the presentation of that, about the book, they talk about it's not a movement unless it moves without you. And that was the moment for me when I knew that we'd actually embedded the change, because people recognized that it might be difficult at times, but we all had responsibility. And I think to the people that were challenging us, what we would say is that, okay, you're challenging us on this one specific issue, but do you know that we are investing, I think it was £10 million we invested over 3 years to make all of our sites accessible against an internally set benchmark? Do you know that we are partnering with the Alzheimer's Society because we recognise within our membership that the growing rates of dementia, we need to make sure our sites are accessible, because we know the benefit and the power of familiarity to people with dementia, but also the work that our sites can do to help people with that as they're going through that time and that stage of their life. Are you aware of the work that we are doing around, neurodivergent people, and particularly children, to create safe spaces for them? Do you know what we're doing in terms of trying to support people to come into our places who might not necessarily financially be able to normally do that, through participation in kind of like annual events to do those kinds of things? So when you then lay out, look, these are all the ways that we are trying to ensure that we are delivering benefit to the whole nation. And I appreciate that you have concerns about this one specific element. But when you think about it as part of a holistic package, do you still share those, and still have and harbour those concerns? And quite a lot of people are kind of like, oh, I hadn't realised you were doing this other stuff. And that's the difference, I think, between doing something performative because it ticks a box and makes you look good for a moment externally, and genuinely being committed to being a different kind of organisation.
You created the opportunity for this work to happen. And I think as a leadership story, that's fascinating, because that is the truest test of leadership, I believe, that you understand where we are, honestly. You are able to articulate where we need to get to authentically, but you're able to then energize the organisation across a breadth of colleagues, stakeholders, volunteers, partner organisations, across the breadth of the UK, and everyone then finds their own path within that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it helps when there is an agenda that's already been set with an organisation. It helps when you've got people within the organisation that already want to make that happen, that might be frustrated about the difficulties in getting there before. So that kind of environment is useful. But yeah, I think as leaders, our responsibility is to energise and supercharge the change rather than feel that we have to own and deliver all of it ourselves. And I feel that's where we fall foul, because it then relies solely on the energy levels and the commitment of either a single individual or a small team of people. And you can't change the world like that. You can start change like that, but you can't sustain it.
I'd like to move us on now and talk about your work at the Samaritans and the transformation that you're leading there.
Samaritans was created over 70 years ago as a suicide prevention charity in response to a young girl that had died by suicide. And I think that it has grown organically over that time through the time, energy, and unbelievable dedication and commitment of a group of volunteers that I've always had admiration for. So I've worked in volunteering my whole career, but if anyone ever talks to me or asks me a question around, well, who are the most inspirational, who are the most dedicated volunteers out, I would, without skipping a beat, have always said Samaritans. The reason for that is because these are volunteers that run a 24/7, 365 days a year listening service to support people in emotional crisis through the power of listening, without judgment, and at times to some painful conversations where people are, at their wits' end, sometimes at a point where they want to end their own life, and to have a conversation with them and be there to listen to them in those darkest moments. And, our volunteers deliver that service. The leadership within the structure is volunteer-led. And so, we've got 23,000, I think, odd volunteers. There are 14,000 active listeners that are committed to being there for people when they need us most.
How do you equip an organisation that has such an incredible history and is so resonant within our society and prepare it for the years ahead?
The way in which society and the way in which we engage each other might have changed and evolved. We might have access to technology, but I don't think we've ever needed human-to-human connection more than we do now. I did a bit of research in 2018, and it said that, we are closer to each other in terms of digitally and our ability to connect. You can be in a different country and you can have a conversation face-to-face with someone that's like thousands of miles away. But the importance of human connection, and particularly the younger generation's distance from human connection, has grown apart. It's grown further apart. So I think there is definitely huge power in that person-to-person interaction. And for our organisation, it's making sure that people understand and aware that we will always remain committed to that. But there are certain things that have happened through our history that we also need to be mindful of. So the reason we've got, currently 200 odd branches around the country is because just over a decade ago, in order to have a service in your local area, you had to have a local Samaritans number. So you had to have people on the phones literally in the town or the city that you lived in order to be able to provide the service. We've moved away from that now. We've got a national number. There are pressures that are happening in the ways in which people want to volunteer. I've talked about the immense commitments that our volunteers have given, but today people are less likely to give you that level of volunteering activity and over as prolonged a period of time. So that's changed. There are opportunities for us in terms of how do you use, technology in a way that helps you to better engage with people. You couldn't, online chat, as an example, would have been like, what is that, a decade ago. And now it is a way in which our younger generation are increasingly wanting to connect with each other and to, share some of their experiences or to reach out for support. So with all those things going on, I think it's about sparking a conversation with the people who care about what you do, to remind them that you still fundamentally care about what you do and that you have a shared sense of purpose, but that there are a number of threats and challenges that are facing us that mean that if we want to be continuing to deliver these kinds of support to people in 70 years' time, we'll have to make some painful decisions now to enable us to be able to do that.
And in terms of that, meeting people where they are at a moment of crisis, people listening to the podcast will see that shift in terms of different generations being more comfortable having chat conversations rather than face-to-face. Very different approach to using the phone. So how do you meet a younger generation where they need to be met, when their expectation of that user experience is set by some of the richest, most successful tech companies in the world?
People's expectations, like you say, are like based on what they experience through Apple and Google and these multi-billion-pound companies.
They have larger budgets.
Slightly larger budgets than we have, and so you have to try to evolve the best you can with the resources that you've got to deliver the best possible service. Our online chat function had been in pilot. We're now looking at how do we roll that out and expand it, and we've seen through evaluating that younger people are connecting to us through that platform. There's a recognition that perhaps the way in which people in the future will want to interact with us and gain that support might be different. But you've also got to remember your current and the present, and there are thousands, if not millions of people who are currently relying on us who would only want to connect with us through the existing channels that we've got. And so it's about how do you sensitively, appropriately manage a transition that enables you to respond to the demand that you have today, yes, whilst ensuring that you are fit for purpose for the future. And how do you engage with a collection of unbelievably dedicated volunteers to help you navigate and make that change a reality when you know that it might mean that some of the things that they've hold dear about their volunteer experience might need to change. And that's a really difficult.
Can you just share some of the change that you've worked on or are working on that is maintaining the best of today, but also readying the organisation for tomorrow?
As I mentioned earlier on, we've got that structure whereby we've grown up in terms of having lots of little local entities that are supporting and being able to respond to calls. But our volunteer time, and our volunteers are telling us that the amount of time they're having to dedicate to leading their branches, to leading the teams that sit beneath them, has become increasingly burdening, increasingly challenging for them. And so if you've got a volunteer network that is spending an inordinate amount of time looking after a brick building, maintaining that brick building, when actually you're not in it 24/7, 365, you're not utilising its capacity all of that time, you have to ask yourself the question of, should we continue to have that extent of network, or do we reduce the size of the network, and in doing so also create different ways in which we hopefully can either bring volunteers in to grow those ones that we retain, to create opportunities for volunteers to volunteer remotely, which they currently can't do, to see whether or not people can do it from their homes in a safe way, both for them and for their callers, and to, I guess, create space whereby we deliver and develop other opportunities for people to help us to support those who are in emotional crisis, whether that be through outreach or through local campaigning or local advocacy or whatever that might be. Because the key thing in this is that Samaritans is its people, is the volunteers, is the commitment and the dedication that they provide. It's not the buildings that we currently operate from. And we want them to be fit for purpose, accessible, to enable us to deliver more benefit to more people in the future. So that's one example of a change that I can appreciate and understand would be incredibly challenging and difficult for some of our volunteers to cope with. And we need to think through some of the things about how do you maintain that sense of community? How do you ensure that people still feel valued for their contribution and still feel connected to what we do whilst you're going through that change and beyond? But yeah, being appreciative of the fact that what has got us here may not necessarily get us there.
A lot of people listening to our conversation will recognise that, and that some of the structures that get built up in organisations over time then need to be reviewed, and that realisation of the effort, the time which they're requiring to be maintained, and how do you recreate for the next generation of work. In terms of the development, the training, the skills development across a volunteer network, how do you maintain that? To maintain that across such a large user group must be a constant focus.
A lot comes through the transition. So, as you lose volunteers and you bring new volunteers in, having to get those people up to speed, A lot is around how we do the mentoring side of things. So that when I went through the listening training. I thought it was important that someone doing my role went through it. And I would love to be able to be on the phones responding to our callers, but I recognised that personally I couldn't do it. And so you need to have the mentors in place to be able to sit with people through those first calls to help them in terms of how they respond in the moment, to reflect afterwards about things that went well, things they might do differently in the future, and constantly think about their practice. And then teams within the branches to support volunteers who might have had a particularly traumatic experience to unpack that, but then also to provide ongoing development support to help people to further enhance and improve their practice. So all those things are important, but I guess this is where technology development gives you an opportunity. So if we think about AI, and I said up front, we believe in human-to-human connection, and we always will do, but actually if you can train AI to be able to replicate what a caller might share with you, you can create something that can then help your volunteers, both those who are new and those who are currently within, to test and develop and to continue to enhance their practice in a safe environment. Now, we're way off from doing that, but I think that gives one example of some of the thoughts that we're giving to how do you help people to be there in those moments, and to be able to know, we've got this great listening wheel, but to be able to know when does someone need reassurance versus when does someone need you to just be quiet and to give them space to think. When do you need to ask a question? When do you need to, probe in terms of what someone's intent means? Picking up on signals that someone might be softly sending you that they may be considering taking their own life. How do you pick up on that? And then ask the question around, are you feeling suicidal? Because actually for lots of our callers, that's an opener, because a lot of us in society shy away from that conversation, but actually that might be the very conversation that someone needs to have that can help them to process and unpack how they're feeling and understand whether it's something that is impacting them in that moment or whether it's something a bit more substantial than that.
Transformation isn't about going from state A to state B. It's about that constant shift to be responsive to the environment that you're in. What else do you see in the future?
I have the pleasure of being part of a great leadership team where we're all aligned in terms of, okay, well, how do we make this happen? How do we turn this into a reality? The why we are doing it and why it's important, and continually reinforcing that message, but being compassionate around the impact that it will have on people and around what we are asking people to move from in order to get to where we collectively believe we need to be. And it's important that I think we convey to people that, these aren't decisions that we've taken lightly. These aren't choices that we are making on a whim. We are not dispassionate to the impact it will have on people and the concerns that people will have. And though sadly, there will be some people who feel that their journey with Samaritans as a result of this may have come to an end, and we're respectful of that. But the driving force behind everything that we do is our callers, and is making sure that we are not only there for our callers today, but we are there for our callers tomorrow. And we know that we can't answer every call that comes to us. We know that we can't genuinely do 24/7 in the way that we want to do. We know there are channels like online chat that are currently in their infancy that we need to grow to respond to what we know the future demand is going to be. And so it's beholden on us sometimes to face into and support the organisation through difficult choices in order to land in a place where we can deliver the necessary benefit and support for people in the future. And we know that, unfortunately, the mental health challenges, people feeling desperate, people being in emotional crisis, and sadly people feeling suicidal is not going away. Suicide rates are stubbornly high. And it's our ambition that we reduce those to the lowest ever recorded rate by the conclusion of the strategic period. And that's what, hopefully, as a collective, we'll be able to do.
Tiger, thank you so much. And I think personally, and I'm sure on behalf of everyone listening to this, thank you for the work that you and the team do. It's incredibly important in our society. And is there anything you'd like to say at the end of the podcast? Any final words and wisdom you can leave us with?
We talk about, the whole Cotter kind of like, don't do unfreeze, change, refreeze. That doesn't work. And yet actually that's what we're doing a lot of the time. We're in organisations where we have to make shifts, and we do these whole change and transformation programs and then we kind of like go, well, that's it, that's done now, we've done. If we survive it, if we get to the end of it, I mean, most of the transformation programs never actually get delivered. And so what I'm trying to think through in my practice is how can I make the change program I do now the last one that organisation will ever need? How do you build in what all of the skills, the mindset, the culture, the behaviours that you need into your organisation when you next go through change? So actually there's a recognition that the environment around us is rapidly evolving. And as organisations, irrespective of sector, we are going to have to continue to adapt to what we do in order just to keep pace, let alone get ahead. And unless we build that into the fabric of how we are structured and how we operate, we will constantly be expending a huge amount of unnecessary time, effort and energy to get organisations ready for change, rather than continuous improvement being just something that we do on a day-to-day basis.
Tiger de Souza, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. Please follow Powered by People, the podcast from Three Hills on people-powered business transformation, on LinkedIn or wherever you access your podcasts. Join us next time for more inspirational insight from people leaders who craft people-first approaches that enhance revenue, profitability, and long-term value creation. We'll see you next time for more Powered by People.